This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah, so if we just try to recollect it, what we discussed in the last class, so then, so we discussed the today's section. So, but before that, let's try to recollect what we discussed. So we were trying to understand, so how do you configure the local repository? That means how do we use that, the Maven configuration file? So that is the settings.xml file. So how to customize it, especially the local repositories and as well as the server elements. So we are trying to understand it. But the server element, we didn't see the demonstration. So we are just observing about the server element. But what is the main element that we were talking this is like local repository, how do you customize it? So that was one of the concept. That is how to customize the local repository in the settings.xml file of the Maven. And then we started to discuss this on like understanding about the repositories, like three types of the repositories we were trying to understand. So those are all like the local repository, the central repository, and the remote repository. The local repository, we can customize it in the settings.xml file. And as well as yeah, so there is a one, but default that is we have this in the user home directory.m2 folder. That was one of the option we are observing. And then central repository point of view, where we don't have this any explicit configuration for that. So default, so whenever the Maven is started, so what are the dependencies that is required for this the project? So it is going to identify from the local repository. In case in the local repository those are not available, then it tries to fetch it from the remote repository. That is we were trying to understand it. So there was one concept, that is a central repository, the default repository, but we don't have any explicit configuration for that. That was one option. And the third option we are trying to understand, so the remote repositories. Yes, remote repositories are about our custom repositories, which are managed within the organization networking level. And so these repositories will be used to manage that the artifacts of this the project or the application, which is required to share it to the same project between the multiple environments, or this artifact which is required to distribute it so between the different projects. So on the basis of these requirements, either the sharing that artifact between the environments of the project, or sharing that artifact between the different projects in the organization. So on the basis of the requirement, we can customize it about these remote repositories. So one of the example we are trying to understand for this remote repository, that is a Nexus. So we are going to talk about the Nexus, so which will come back. But before talking about it, these like artifact repositories, we are trying to understand two more keywords. That is the revisions and as well as the snapshots. The snapshot that will be used within this the development environment between the developers on the same version number, multiple copies that is helping to upload it or to download it or to manage it. But whereas like I'm in the revision version, the only one version copy, so which will be managed in that artifact repository as a release, like which will be used in the QA or so staging and the remaining all the environment that will be used. Yeah, so that's about understanding about the snapshots and release. But how to define this? So within the Maven, is it a snapshot or a release? Is so in the version tag, we can define that is it a release copy or is it a snapshot copy? And as well as in the dependency section, so it has to use it the dependency as a snapshot dependency, or it has to use it as a revision. That means iPhone snapshot, the simple attribute which is making the difference, is it a snapshot copy or is it a release copy? Yeah, there was the concepts we are trying to understand. So on that, the snapshots of the releases before talking about the remote repository, because whenever we are defining the remote repository is going to accept it. So is it required as a snapshot or is it required to upload the artifact as a release? So it is going to accept it. These are all the policies which are defined in the repositories. So those policies we are trying to understand it before going to talk about. So how do we upload that artifact as a snapshot or as a releases? Yeah, that was one of the concepts which we are trying to understand. So in the last class, now let's move to that. The next concept which we are trying to understand is Nexus to launch it. There's a remote repository we need to configure, but Nexus to before to configure that. So Nexus is that's one of the web application or one of the application, so which is running on one of the web server. So that web server is required to understand it. That is one of the server like the Java GT based server which we need to understand it. So, but what about that? The server like the web servers or the app servers which we try to understand, and then we go for the taking about the Tomcat. So how do we manage the Tomcat servers? So that is one concept, because like if you are going to perform this deployment activities of the Java JT based applications, or if you're going to launch it about those Nexus applications, or if you're going to launch it about the Jenkins application, there are all the applications which are running on servers. So we should have some knowledge on the middleware servers. So that knowledge we are going to talk about this today. That is and the web servers and app servers, some differences, and we are going to understand this one of the Tomcat web server. Yeah, that is the agenda for today, and then which we try to understand it. So once the Tomcat is over, then we go for like how do we launch the Nexus on the Tomcat server. So we discuss it, and then once Nexus is available, then we go back to the Maven. So how do we upload that artifact from the Maven to this either Nexus as a snapshots or the releases? Yeah, there are the concepts. So now let me talk about the next activity, that is Tomcat server. Yeah, so before talking about this Tomcat server, but what about these servers? Suppose if you have already having the experience about the servers, then we can skip this section like types of servers, understanding the app servers or the web servers, the difference. So do you have this idea on these servers, both of you?
I have experience in this servers and working in middleware.
Hello? Yeah, Rajeshwar, do you have this idea on servers? Okay, so maybe he's not there. Okay, let me talk it about anyway. So what are the types of servers that we have? So we try to understand those types of servers. Then we see that like so the Tomcat, so one of the web server, we go for that. Yeah, so this is a prerequisite. But anyway, let me talk it about the types of servers which are available in the market, which are supporting for the Java JT based applications. Then we try to take it about the Tomcat and we discuss about it. Yeah, the types of servers to host that application, like as we were trying to understand it, the J2SE based application and J2EE based application. In J2SE based applications, we can directly run on the JVM, so we don't have the dependency on so there's other servers. So directly we can install the JDK and we can extract the jar files, or we can use it the jar files. So we don't have the big dependence on the servers. But especially enterprise editions, we are trying to talk about, whenever we are going to launch it about it, the enterprise edition applications, yes, we have the dependency on the servers, but what about those servers and what are the types of servers are available? So let's have this understanding about it. To host the Java JT based applications, what are the types of servers are available in the market? Yeah, so total we have the two types of applications, like one is, two types of the servers. One is web servers, but what about these web servers? If we try to understand it, like whenever we are asking about it, like internet based applications, so all these applications mostly which we use it, that the HTTP based protocol. Or if you are performing the file upload or file download, so suppose now you are using and you are going to upload the resume or you are downloading the resume, then internally it uses this FTP protocol as well as file transfers. Yeah, so the main like the web servers which are supporting that, the main protocol HTTP protocol, the protocol so the main protocol, so which supports, so by the web server, that is the HTTP protocol or FTP, and as well as So there are, so internal about this servers, if we just observe this web servers point of view, the mainly two containers we can talk about this web servers, like a web container and as well as web services container. So we are trying to understand web server is supporting the HTTP protocol or HTTPS, the secure or the plain protocol, that is the type of data. But these web servers, the internally, so the contains about the web containers or the web services containers. But what about these web containers and web services containers? And when do we, when the server is going to use it internally, the process of this web container, or when the web server is going to use it, the web services process. So on the base of the type of data which you are passing in that, the request and response whenever you are using HTTP protocol. Yeah, the type of data, if you just observe this, like so normally whenever we open the browser, so if you hit this any Gmail or any kind of the application, so most of the browsers, like so which are having this so the having the type of data is HTML data, like all these. Yeah, okay. So is it okay now? Okay, let me continue this 2 minutes, then we can if you have the still issues, then we'll see that. Yeah, so what about this, the type of data which will be submitted through the browser, uh, from the browser to this, the backend server is, the most of the data which we have this is HTML type of the data. So hypertext markup language. So there's the developers who are implementing about it, they use HTML or some JSPs or some scripts they used about it. So the JavaScript or the HTML or the Java or JSPs. So there are the programs they use it to design that the user interfaces. So thus if that once if you enter this any information in that the website, and if you are submitting this the data in the format of the HTML to this from the client to the servers, then that type of the data which we can call this as HTML, that HTML kind of the data which will be processed by this web containers. But both web container and web services both support the HTTP protocol, but the type of content based. So which type of content we are trying to understand first is HTML. So most of the web applications are using about the HTML data. So user submit this any request, the requested data which will be transferred over the network in the format of this HTML to the servers. So that's kind of the data to handle that. What is the container that is available from the web server is, that is web container. So web container which handle the HTTP protocol, and the type of data is HTML. And another type of data which we have this in these applications, like we have the service-based applications as well as. So suppose service-based applications, if we try to understand it, like suppose any online banking portal applications, if you observe that, suppose irctc.co.in. So once we log into the IRCTC site, that is a web application. So where you are renting that username and password, log into that and train tickets booking about it. And once this all the details have been filled, we need to go for the payment options. But payment gateway, which is integrated with the IRCTC portal, so the payment gateway is providing by the third-party providers. So that is once we enter this all the payment gateway details, and if we submit the request is not coming to this. That's request to process that is not coming to the support our server, so which is passing or which is transmitted to that third-party service. So like a third party service, maybe, that application like the Citibank or the ICICI Bank, like the different gateways are available, different providers. But those providers, maybe they have implemented their applications with the .NET or the Java, or maybe we don't know that what are the types of technologies they have used. But the point what we have to see is here, so one IRCTC application is trying to communicate with the third party application, but the third party application, which is having that with a different language or the different technology. But what is the type of data that will be used between these two different types of applications whenever having this the data transmissions or data transfer? So what is the type of data that is used is XML kind of the data. Like most of the service-based applications, if you observe that the XML kind of the data which will be used as a request and responses. because we don't know that's which type of technology, because most of the technologies which support XML. But this IRCTC, whenever it is transferring the data to that like third-party bankers, we don't know that what is the technology they have that. So the universal language has to be used. One of the universal language which you have this is XML. Yeah, so if the data type is XML and if that the protocol is the HTTP, then those type of application we can call this is service-based applications. To handle the service-based applications from the servers, we have the separate engines internally. So that's engines which we can say this in our server terminology, web services container. So web container which handle the HTTP protocol with HTML data, and web services container like there are the service-based request and responses which it handles, but the protocol is the HTTP. But internally SOAP protocols and some other, but they're all the mainly using about the HTTP. But the type of data is XML kind of the data, XML parsing. So if the service-based applications which are using XML data, so web service is the container which is available from the servers. If the type of application is HTML type of data where web kind of for the request and responses, then what is the type of container that is available from the servers to handle it is that is web container. But both are supporting the HTTP protocol. Yeah, so if you have the HTTP protocol, this server is the protocol dependent. So this server, the protocol dependent like HTTP or FTP, so the file uploading or file downloading. So these kind of activities which we can go for that. Most of that static based applications which supports it, or just data transfer from server to client to servers or servers to some other remote servers. So if the data is required just as a transmitter, so which we can use it these kind of the servers, that is web servers. But what are the different web servers are available in the market? So if you just observe that, so we have like Apache server, that the HTTP server, we call that already, which we discussed one of the service, and OHS, Oracle HTTP server, IHS, IBM HTTP server, we have this iPlanet, so the Sun1 web server, or Nginx. So there are the different web servers which are available in the market, so which are supporting that to handle that web service related functionalities. So just like a static content type of applications, or like just a data which is receiving about it by the web server and passing the data to the backend server. Suppose as we discussed in our high level architecture, the proxy servers, so which are using a software load balancers, are going to so receive the request, and this request, once it is received, forwarding the request to backend servers. Yeah, so those kind of the functionalities like static content or the simple XML data transferring that, or like the proxy servers to use it. So one of the servers which are available in the market, web servers. But another type of server which is available in the market is that is the app servers, that is application servers. But what are the functionality that we can have it from the app servers? If you just observe that, these are all also the web servers. That means it supports HTTP protocol with the different types of this data, either HTML or the XMLs, and as well as it supports business layers. Like business layer, suppose a banking application, if we talk about it, yes, we have the user, once he has logged in until to the logout, what are the transactions he is performing, that all the transaction that is required to manage it or to handle it, like a transaction based applications. But static application, yes, just receiving the data, and the static data whatever it is available, just giving the response back to the client. But in the enterprise edition applications which are expecting some business transactions also required to perform it, there's a business transaction to handle it, or like the messaging systems to handle it, there is JMS, and as well as web services. There are the different containers are available from that app server. So all these containers are supporting about it to handle that enterprise editions. Like HTTP protocol or those business transactions, yes, the servers are going to use the different protocols for that on the base of the server, like RMA based mechanisms, which we can call it, and messaging systems which are supporting that. There is SMTPs protocols, or like which are supporting that the queues of the topics, like to send us the messages from one source to another destinations on XML. So there are the different functionalities that we can use it from the app server. So my application is simple static application. Then I don't need to go for the app server. I can simply use it web server. But my application requirement is enterprise, like which I'm having that. Yes, user interface is required with HTTP protocol, and the backend business transactions required. The messaging systems, if I'm expecting that, then I need to go for the deploying my application on the app servers. But what are the different app servers which are available in the market? Yeah, so Java JT based applications, if we just observe that, yes, we have the WebLogic, the WebSphere, the JBoss, the Tomcat. Yeah, there are the different web servers. The before it was the Glassfish, Oracle App Server, the different the middleware servers which are available. So to support the Java J2E. If it is the .NET based application, yes, we have the separate server IIS. So on the basis of the type of technology, suppose if you are using PHP, we can use it. Apache itself is the server. So like that. So which are type of application you are going to use it? The type of application is required to deploy on one of the server. So is it required that the web server functionalities, or is it required that the app server functionalities of that application, that on the base of the application requirement, which can be selected about one of the server, either web server or app servers. Yeah, finally, if we just observe the difference between the web server and app servers. So web server handles the HTTP protocol, and there is the protocol dependent. So that's like which protocol, that's the HTTP protocol. But app servers handles any number of protocol like HTTP, TCP, or RMA based, or we have like SMTP. So the different protocols it supports, which we can call this as protocol independent. And web servers mostly be designed to serve the static content, or the proxy servers also which we can use it. So which receive the request and forward the request to backend servers. But whereas app server is used to run the business logic or the dynamically generating the presentation logics, like a dynamic content purpose. So static content, if you just observe that, like suppose riseandshine.technologies.com, so always the pages are the same. But whereas if you log into the Gmail application, on the basis of the user account, the user content is different. Yeah, so static is, it never changes. The dynamic is like on the basis of the user request or the user based, the data will be changed. Yeah, so web servers like web-based applications, but whereas app servers, the web and as well as enterprise applications, and web servers provides only web container, the servlet or the JSPs, so mostly which we can use it. But whereas app servers like the web container, EJBs or the JMS, like all the modules of the Java J2E, which can be handled through this app servers. And different servers which are available in the market for the web servers, Apache, OHS, IHS, so IIS, Sun1, iPlanet, or the app servers, the WebLogic, WebSphere, the OAS, the JBoss, Glassfish. There are all the different app servers which are available in the market. Yeah, so that's about. So before talking about it, some like concepts on the middleware servers, which we need to have this understanding the web servers and the app servers. Now let's talk it about that, the Tomcat server. Yeah, so we are going to talk at this all these deployment, the presentation point of view. We are going to talk at the Tomcat server. But what about this Tomcat and how do we use this Tomcat? So what is the purpose of this Tomcat? Let's have this all those points. Yeah, so Tomcat, so they're the open source. So almost 50 to 60% of the Java JT projects in their environment, they are using about the Tomcat. And this is open source. And who is the vendor? Is Apache is the vendor. And this is a platform independent. That means Tomcat, the only installation process is different, but how do we start it, stop it, or how do we check it, the process, and almost all the activities are almost the same. And who is the vendor? Is Apache. And prerequisite is you can use it anyways. We don't have the any specifications to talk it. And if you have this at least 1 GB of the RAM, that's more enough to launch the server. Even that is 1 GB is also not required. So that is but so as a performance point of view, if you have the 1 GB of the RAM, that is recommended. Yeah, that's about some small the information. But how do we install it? Yes, the Tomcat is also one of the Java application. So this to launch it, the Java application, the first and foremost, what is the dependency that we have is JDK dependency. Like Maven, before installing, we were trying to understand the JDK is a prerequisite like that. So there's Tomcat to install it before this, the Maven is, JDK is prerequisite. So we know that how do we install the JDK. So download the tarball and extract it, and so set the Java home and verify that the Java. Yeah, already we had about it, how do we set up the Java, but as a documentation it has been given here. But how do we install the Tomcat, or how do we work with this, the Tomcat? So now let's so try to understand about it. So where we can download this Tomcat and how do we install the Tomcat? So very straightforward. So there are some in you are so if we just try to Tomcat download. Yeah, so this is the official site, the Apache vendor, tomcat.apache.org, and you can go to the download section, and here you can see there's the Tomcat versions, the 7 version, 8 version, 9 version, different versions are available, and the 8 is recommended, so which we can take at this, so 8 version. So let me take it about this, the Tomcat 8 version. Yeah, so in this download section, so if you just observe here, so this is the current version 8.5.37, and you can refer the readme files if you need it about this, the Tomcat purpose. And here you can see this, so like a downloadable files, the zip file is available, that is for the Windows, or if it is the Linux based operating system, which you can download the tar.gz file. And 32-bit Windows based 64 the bit Windows zip files. They are like as simple zip files are the tarball. You can just copy it and extract it and rename this directory. How we have done for this, the Tomcat, Maven, and as well as JDK, the same activities were here as well as. And yes, you can refer this, the documentation over here. So there's a full documentation, you can download it, the deployer files, or some extras if you'd like to add it, or embedded files. So they're all not required. And source code distribution also, suppose the source code of the Tomcat also we can download it, but that is not required for us. So let's go for taking about this URL and so downloading this .tat.gz and installing the Tomcat. Yeah, so here we have done so far about the JDK installation, Maven installation. And this is a Maven app. We are talking about this. So how do we run this the Maven utility and a Maven repository? This is a local repository which are customized, but this is the one we are not using about it. Okay, let me leave it up. Not an issue. Let me try to download this Tomcat URL now. So we are going to add the Tomcat. There are all the direct links, so you can just copy the URL and you can download it. Yeah, so this is Apache tarball, so Tomcat. Now let me extract this one. Yeah, that has been extracted. Now let me remove this file, so this is no more required. So this yeah, so this is extracted directory, but instead of using this one, so let me rename this. So what are the name I'm going to give this is this Tomcat. We are going to use it to launch the Nexus server. So I'm just giving the directory name as an Nexus server, but so the Nexus point of we'll try to understand later, but first we are going to talk about the Tomcat server. So Tomcat, how do we install it, how do we start it, stop it, and all those activities which will come back. So let me rename this directory as as Nexus server, but just we are giving the name as Nexus, but internally that is completely the Tomcat server itself. If we go to that Nexus server, yeah, so there are these are all the files which are available within Tomcat. Now let's talk about it. So all these directory systems which you have this within the Tomcat. So the simple, the 2 minutes which will come back. So what is the directory structure which you have this is? Yeah, so any server or any tool we are talking about it. So what are the directories which we need to understand it is. So let me talk about it. Yeah, now this is the Tomcat home directory. So wherever we have installed this work location or that's directory, we call as Tomcat directory. But in this, so what are the main directories that we have this within the Tomcat is, suppose the first activity which you are expecting. So let me just describe this activities from the Tomcat. So what are the activities we are expecting is installation of the server. That's we have just seen that. And the next activity which you are trying to understand is starting or stopping the server. So we should know all these activities from the Tomcat server. So installation of the server, starting and stopping the server, and then configuration of the server. But what are the configurations which will come back? And then which we have this one more activity is logs which we should know. That means the troubleshooting point of view, logs files verification. And finally, what is the one more activity which we have this is deployment. So how do you perform the deployment activity? Suppose, this is not only for the Tomcat. So if you are going to work for this any tool, suppose you are learning tomorrow database, or tomorrow you are learning about the some Nginx server, or tomorrow you are learning the some like the WebLike server, or any server. So if you are going to use it within the CI/CD process, at least these activities which we should know. So what are those activities? If you just observe that, how do we install that tool? So that could be Nginx, that could be database, or that could be middleware server, that could be like some XYZ tool. So which we should know the understanding of that, how do we install the tool, and if that the server is required to start it, stop it, yes, what are the scripts that is going to helpful, and how do we verify that the process of this the server that is starting and stopping, and verifying that the process or checking that the server is reachable or not, those activities which we should know. And configuring about the server, that means any ports or the specifications which are required to customize it. So on the basis of that infrastructure, those customizations, how do you do that? That means the configuration of the servers, like Tomcat server ports or the Tomcat server the users. So we have some activities will come back. And log files, suppose if the server is not starting, or if the server is a failed, or if the server is throwing some errors, so how do we trace it about that their issues, like which we should have this understanding on the log files. And as this middleware server point of view, once all these activities we know that, then we should know about it, how do we deploy the applications as well as. But the deployments point of view, again we have the subtasks like the install or deploy, so this activity, and as well as reinstall or redeploy, or which we can say this update. Let me give this update. And uninstall or delete, so let me give this as delete, or we can go for this undeploy. And not only this, and starting that application or stopping that application. So if you are working this deployment is nothing but, so that is application management activities. Once this server is available, so how to manage that application? So that application related installation activities or update activities or delete activities or starting stopping activities, all these activities also which we should know. These are all belong to deployments. But when can we perform the deployment is? So once all these activities which we should know, then we can perform the deployment. This application management on the server. So they're all activities which we should know. So if you'd like to handle about this deployment activities in the CI/CD process. Yeah, so that's about, so just we had about that's how do we install the server. So how do we install it is Tomcat is just download it, tarball or the zip file, so extract it and rename it, that's all. So even we didn't talk about that, how do we specify that, what are the environment variables also. So environment variables also we don't have this any specification, but make sure about it JDK is installed and the JDK environment variables have been set up on that machine. Yeah, so these are all the activities which you are expecting. Now just we have done installation. Now let's look at about the starting and stopping. But before going to understand all these activities, like how we can start it and stop it, that means you need to use it some scripts for starting and stopping, where those scripts are located. And if you would like to configure it, so we should know this, what are the configuration files of the Tomcat? Yes, where are those Tomcat configuration files? And if you'd like to manage the troubleshooting activities, which we should know that log files of the Tomcat server, or how I can deploy that application to the Tomcat server. So there are the activities. So if you just understand in those activities point of view, then it is very easy to remember that the Tomcat home directory. But what are the main directories that we have? This is now the starting and stopping. Starting and stopping the servers, like which we have this, or which we need to use it some scripts for starting servers or stopping servers. But they're all executable scripts. So executable scripts mostly where those are available in the bin folder. So in the Tomcat home directory, we have this one bin folder. So here we can see that the important files, that is startup.sh, shutdown.sh, version.sh, and some files like catalina.sh. So there are some scripts or the binaries are available which are helping to know about the version of the Tomcats, or to start the servers or to stop the servers, or to define some variables which are required for the servers. Yeah, there are the scripts which are available in the bin folder. So if you go to the Tomcat home directory, whether it is Windows operating system or whether the Unix operating system, the file names are same, but only on the base of this, the type of operating system, the file extensions are going to change it. So if it's the Windows, you will be having that start script is in the Tomcat home directory, wherever you install in the bin folder, you can see startup.bat file, shutdown.bat. So like this, so the batch files are available. So on the basis of the type of operating system which you are using, that is about binaries, the executables. And the second we are trying to understand is configuration of the server. So where the configuration files are located. So we have this one folder, that is the conf. In the conf folder, so important two files we have this, that is the server.xml, that is one configuration file, and another one which we have this is tomcat-users.xml. So this is one more important configuration file. Yeah, there are the two important configuration files. So from the Tomcat conf folder, so binaries, start and stop scripts, configuration folder, the configuration files, and the next activities which I have this is, hello, 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 any issues? Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so in this configuration point of view, the main configuration files which we have this is, that is server.xml and tomcat users.xml. So there are the two files that we can find it in the conf folder, which will come back to use it later. Yeah, that is about configuration activities. And the next activity which has this is, so if the server is having this any issues, or if the server is you are not able to start it, or you have performed some deployment activity but the server is the failed, so while doing this or while loading that application, we need to verify this, the logs or the issues of this the servers. But where we can verify this logs or the errors of the servers is log files. But where the logs files are located in the Tomcat, if we just verify that, so we have the logs folder. So important two log files we have, this is access.log file. But what is the difference and what is the need of these files, which will come back. And the second, another important log file we have, this is catalina.out file. There are the two important log files, but we'll come back whenever we are discussing after starting the servers. We'll observe all these files. So that is about logs to manage it. The binaries, configuration logs, and one more directory which we have this is, but we don't have this any specification activities to understand it. The lib folder, which contain the libraries, that means the supported files to launch the Tomcat server, the libraries, the lib folder, but we don't have any specification to talk it. And yes, the deployments point of view. So deployments to perform it, that means you need to take the var file or the ER files, and we need to install on the server. Installing on the server is nothing but the particular directory you need to copy the file. Then the server is going to extract the var file or the ER files, and it is going to try to load the application. But in which directory we can copy that var file or the ER file for the deployment purpose. That is one more directory which we have this from the Tomcat, that is the web apps directory. So this directory, which we can say that's deployment directory. That means any application you are going to host it, that application where I can deploy it. Yeah, so simple, go to the Tomcat home directory web apps, whether that is Windows or whether Unix. So this is the directory, so to host the applications. And last but not the least, so one more directory, what do we have this is, so there's temporary and the walk. So there are the two directories, but whatever these two directories is, it is going, so the Tomcat servers, once if you deploy the var file content will be extracted during the loading that application. Suppose in our Windows or the Unix operating system, we have the TMP is the directory, so temporary directory. Suppose any .exe file, if you download it and if you just double click it, the .exe files will be extracted first to the temporary folder of the system level. Then once it is extraction completed, then it starts about the installation process. Like that, any var files or the ER files, if you're deploying this to the Tomcat, it is going to try to load that. So there's extracting all those files to the temporary directory location, and once it is extraction is done, then it will be loaded to the server. And work directory, so this is like as a temporary cache file system, so which contains the cache files of the application. This is about temporary files. These are all just we should know, because sometimes so whenever we are starting the server will get the lock exception. So then what is the recommended option is clear the cache and restart the service. But what is the cache to clear it? Where I can clear it the cache? Yes, temporary and work directory content, just to remove it and restart the service. Yeah, so the total directories, if you just remember about it, once the Tomcat is installed, the bin folder, binaries, there are the executables, the server starting, stopping, or the version information, or some arguments if you would like to specify that, or some the option variables, so which we have some scripts. So those scripts you can find it in the bin folder. And conf folder is configuration files of the Tomcat server, the server.xml or Tomcat users.xml. So if we talk about it, all these files, yeah, bin folder. So if you just observe this in the bin folder, yeah, so here we can find it .bat files. So shutdown script, if you just observe shutdown.bat file is available, shutdown.sh file is available. If it is the Windows, we can use it this script, or if it is the Unix operating system to shut down the server, so we can use it this script. Like version.batch, version.sh, and startup.batch, sh, and shutdown.batch files or sh files, or some Catalina files which are available. So you can use it in the script also to start a stop it by passing the arguments. Yeah, so there are the different scripts which are helping about it. So there is binary files, and conf is the next directory, and we are going to talk about the server.xml. So this is one of the important configuration file, and another important configuration file to configure the users or to define the users with roles like Tomcat users.xml. So this one also we are going to talk at that. And the logs, but logs are not yet created so far because we haven't started the server. Once the service has been started, we can see. So the log files. So there are the two important log files. We're going to talk it. In which context, which log file we use it. So we'll come back to that. On the lib folder, but we don't have this any specification to talk about the lib folder. So there are all the supported jar files as a class path entries and web apps. Yes. So this directory, so which is helping about it to host about our applications like in the default some applications are available, or we have this about our WAR files or the applications. You can just simply copy to the web apps folder, which will be used as a deployment directory for the Tomcat. And so there's two more directories if you just observe that. So we have the temporary and work. So there are like as temporary files and cache files of the servers which are going to manage it. In case the server starting times, if you have any issues, the lock exceptions, then you can simply stop the process and clear the content from these directories and restart the service. That's we can call this as cache clearance as well as. Yeah, so that's about the directories. Now let's talk about it, how to start and stop the services and how to verify the process. Yeah, so if you go to the bin folder and we can directly use it about startup.sh, or if you'd like to run this the background process, we can use it ampersand options to run this the process background. So if you just use it this option, so startup.sh, yeah, it is showing about it Catalina base. So the base directories and home directories where exactly the Tomcat log is located, that directories it is showing. And JRE home, yes. So which JDK is using about by this Tomcat? Yes, this is the home directory, Java home directory, which is referring by this Tomcat. And finally, it is launching about this class path entries. This is bootstrap.jar files and the Tomcat Julie.jar file. There are all the jar files which are added to the class path to launch the Tomcat server successfully. Yeah, now it is showing this the status as Tomcat started. So how do we verify that the Tomcat status is? Already we know that the process verification, that the ps-ef, and you can verify that the grep Tomcat. Or this one we can verify this with the Java process also. Yeah, so this is a user account which has been started, and this is the process ID. So that is a 2745 is the process ID. And suppose on the same system, can we start the multiple Tomcats? Yes, we can start it on the single machine, 2 or more Tomcat servers. But how do we identify that? Suppose whenever we run the ps-ef grep Tomcat, so it is going to list it all the Tomcat server related process. So this process ID is belong to that which Tomcat server. How do I identify that? Because here we have started only one server, we can understand that okay, this process is belong to that about the Tomcat which I have started, and this is belong to that my home directory of the Tomcat is this one. But if you would have started about the 2 or 3 more Tomcat servers on the single machine, but how do you identify that which process ID is belong to the which process? So within the process information, you can see this one of the property, there's the Catalina home. So this is the, I mean, we don't say the Tomcat home directory, but the standard terminology point of view, what is the terminology that we can use it to identify the Tomcat home directory is Catalina home. And by referring about this directory, this property, we can understand that okay, so this process ID is belong to this Tomcat server. Yeah, so this is a way identification of the process, there's a process running or not. And the second option what we have this is we can access it through the server URL as well as. So two approaches. Once Tomcat is installed, so this is a Tomcat directory structure which you are trying to understand. And the next point what we have is start up the server. Yes, we have started and we are verifying, but we can use it that the URL also. So, but the URLs, like how that will be constructed is, as we know about it, the protocol with IP address and port numbers. Yes, now the HTTP is the protocol with this system's IP address wherever the Tomcat is running with that IP address, and we can use it with the port. The default port of the Tomcat server is 8080. So let's try to access this Tomcat server through the URL verification. First of all, let me get it about this the IP address of the system. Yeah, so you are expecting this the presenter? Yeah, sure. Just let me. Hello. Yeah, Rajeshwar. Hello. 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 Yeah, Rajeshwar. Hello. Yeah, is it okay now? But I am not sure thus. I mean, the voice is very low and I am not able to hear anything. Rajeshwar, are you there? Okay. Okay, fine. Okay, so let me continue. Okay. Yeah, so first let me, no issues, don't worry. Yeah, so let me continue this. Yeah, so this IP address, let me take it this IP address. Then we see this accessing the URL of the server. So let me go back to this. So we have launched the Tomcat server on the virtual machine. So through the Vagrant we have launched, but we are trying to access this Tomcat server on the host machine, that the Windows host machine. So that's the point. So let me show that. So this is the IP address and the port which you have this is 8080. Yes, so if you got this message is nothing but the Tomcat is up and running on this machine. So this is a machine IP address. Suppose if I use the local host on this browser, local host is nothing but that is a Windows machine, but the no Tomcat is running. I cannot access that. So you are accessing the remotely. So there's a remote to the system's IP address. Yes, wherever the Tomcat is running, the system's IP address, and then port, so which we can access it. So now we can see that this is the home page of the Tomcat, and you can find that which version we are using about that version information, and you can access some documentations. So this Apache documentation of this version and some configuration, but you just observe this. So whenever we are clicking on those tabs, so it is trying to access that within this URL. That means within about our server, it is going to use it some application like a docs application, and within the docs some configuration and examples is a slash examples, some examples it has been given. And yes, so there are the different URLs it is using, but just observe that. So why we are talking all these points is we'll come back to that. So there are the different applications which are already available on the Tomcat server. Suppose if I'm able to get this home page is nothing but this is one of the application which is running within the Tomcat server. Yeah, so there's a URL verification and the process wise verification. There are the two ways which we can go for that. That is the verify in the server. Yeah, so that's about starting the server and how to verify the process using the ps-ef command, or we can use it about the URL, so the IP address and port number. That is another approach. But how do you shut down it? Yeah, so shutdown script is directly available, so which you can go for that and run the script. That is shutdown.sh. Yeah, no, this process has been shut down, and if you verify this, the ps-ef grep java grep tomcat, and the no process is running with this tomcat. And if you just refresh this, the site is down because the server is not available. Yeah, so that's about starting and stopping, like straightforward scripts which are available. So we can use it startup scripts. Yeah, so that is server is up and running. And one more script what do you have to say is, if you just verify that the version.sh, you can get the complete version information of the Tomcat. That is the version.sh, which is available in the bin folder. This is a server version, so there's Apache Tomcat 8.5.37. And the server built recently. This is a December 12, 2018. And this is the server number and OS. So this is the OS which we are using. On this OS, this server is running. And architecture of this OS, that is AMD64. And the JVM version information also. This is the JVM version which we are using. So on this OS, this JDK is running. On this JDK, this Tomcat application is hosted, and it is running as a Tomcat server. Yeah, so that's about. So there's a bin folder, so some important files. Yeah, next one more point what we have this is, so like so before talking about the configurations, let me talk about the logs files. So what about these logs, and what are the different logs files are available, which log file we use it in which context? Yes, which we need to understand some points on the logs. So let's talk about this on the logs. Yeah, so mainly two log files we are saying. So there is so those, if you just remember about it, so access log and catalina.out file. But what about this access log, and when do we use it access logs, and what about this catalina.out, and when do we use it the catalina.out file? Suppose if I try to observe this here, the local host access log or the local host file, the tail-f. Yeah, so on which date the server is started, I mean the server is running, each day that is going to have the separate log file. So here if you observe this log file, yeah, so this is the local host we are using. On this one, let me show this one more file. Yeah, so access log file, if you just verify this, it contains that from which IP address the request has been received and at what time the request has been received. So, and which type of request. So this is the third argument. What is the type of argument which others is? Which type of request is it, a get or post, and which resource the user is trying to access it. That means access log mainly is helping about it. So from which client the request has been received. Client is nothing but the here the IP address, from which IP address the request has been received to the server, at what time the request has been received, the date and time, and as well as it is going to give that which resource he is trying to access it. So in this request, which is trying to access about some PNG file, and which is belong to the get request, and the HTTP status scores which are helping that it has been processed, or that it has been redirected, or that request is successful, or the request is failure, the status scores of that particular request. So we have this 2xx, 3xx, 4xx, the 5xx status codes which are helping the server is successfully process the request. So that is like I mean, so server is successfully received the request is nothing but 2xx. So 3xx series which we have this is, so the server is redirections. Like the request is received, but it is redirecting to some service or some third parties, the applications, like redirections. Like 2xx, 3xx, we can skip it. But important, which you have the 4xx, that means like the page cannot be displayed. So I'll come back to that. So we are going to face it some exceptions. We'll try to understand those exceptions, those cases. So 4xx. So if you have this any issues, so we can think about this the client related issues. I mean the client properly has given the URL or not, and the what is the resource he is trying to access, is that he's had the proper permissions or not. So that is authentication or authorizations related, or the resource not found. So these kind of that the issues that the 4xx series. Like these are all we call this as HTTP status codes. So main I'm talking about the 4xx. So there's a which are representing about it the client side the issues. But what are the types of the issues like which you have this is 404. If we just observe that the page not found, that means what are the resource he is trying to look at about it, that resource is not identified by the server. Or sometimes we'll going to get it, that's a 403 forbidden. That is, he doesn't have the proper permissions on the resource which he's trying to access about it. The 404, 403. Yeah, so there are so there are the different the issues from the client side point of view, so which are representing the 4xx series. But another types which you have to see is 5xx. So this is server side issues. That means user request is valid, but while processing the request, internally something is happened in the server level. That could be memory issues, that could be like socket issues, or that could be like communicating with the databases, or some exception from that application. Something is happened within the server and which is not able to process the request, and which is written the status code as the 5xx series. Yeah, there are the two important. So on the base of the status codes, we can identify that is it server issue or is it a client issue. So here access logs, if we just verify that it is tracking about that, so from which IP address the request is received. So we are doing that all the requests from the Windows system. So my Windows system's IP address, so one of that, yeah, so so what is that the IP address which is handled is 192.168.33.1. Yeah, so all the requests which are coming from the 33.1, and which request the get request. So we are trying to access about some examples. So there are the request which is tracking at what time the request is received, and from which IP address the request is received, and which resource is trying to access it. So when this will be helpful is, suppose if the client is not able to access the applications, or sometimes we need to track it that from which IP addresses the request have been received. So there's suppose list of all the IP addresses in the particular duration. So from which IP address the request have been received to the servers, if you'd like to trace it. So what is the log file that is supporting is access log file. So access log file, which is going to helpful to track that. So from which IP address that request has been received, at what time it has been received, for which request purpose it has been received. Yeah, so that is access log. But what is the Catalina.out file is? So if you observe this one more log file here, that is Catalina.out. This is the main server log file. That means once a request is received, so from which host the request is received, access is tracking that information. And once this information is tracked, it is going to hand out the request to the server. But the server, whatever the transaction it is performing on the request, that a transaction related complete information that is going to write it to the Catalina.out file. Whether the transaction is successful, whether the transaction is the failed, or is it an error, or is it an warning, or is it critical, or is it like alert mechanism. So this complete information of this, the type of the transaction which is performed, the transaction, is it information, is it a warning, or is it a critical, or is it an error, or is it a, like which you have the alerts or emergency. So all that, the kind of the type of transactions it is going to write to the Catalina.out file. Yeah, so okay, let me show this, then we can talk about. So if you open this file, yeah, so here we can see this list of all the transactions which are happened. But how do I identify that the transaction within the server is, each transaction it is going to start with a date and time. Yeah, so this is one transaction which we can identify. So next, one more transaction which is started with the date and time. This is another transaction. This is another transaction. This is one transaction. Like each and every activity of the server, at what time it is doing, the date and time of the transaction, and the transaction, is it belong to that successful, or is it a warning, or is it a failure, or is it a error. So the next which we can say that the log level. So here most of the transactions which are belong to that information. So they're all just giving that information. We don't need to consider on this. But here in the same the transaction in this, after the date and time, if you see there's some error, then we can understand that okay, from the server something is happened that. So is it an alert or is it emergency? We have the different log levels. They're all, we call this as log levels. So, but what are the different log levels which you have? This is info, notice, warning. So if you have these kind of the messages or the transactions, we can skip it that. But what are the important things which you have? This is the error, critical, alert, and emergency. If you see there's any one of these kind of the messages in these log files, like so error or alert, so then we need to take it about this the transaction, and we need to start about that analyzing on the transaction. So this time, so from the server we have some errors, and that error related completed descriptions which we can read it that. And so here it is going to give that which module related the message, as well as suppose internal the server. So the is it belong to the web layer, or is it belong to the JMS layer? So this kind of that the module also. So here they're all showing about it, starting of it, starting and stopping module related some information, and which is trying to load it about all these applications. If you observe that here root applications, and here some examples application. So it is loading that all these application, that application directories. So they are just general information. But if you have any errors, yes, error which is required to take into that and looking into that, the careful about it. That means we need to start up that root cause analysis on that issue. Yeah, so that's about like which we have this the log files. How do we view that from the Tomcat server? So there's the main two entries in the transactions files, like Catalina.out, date and time, is it an error? And then you can understand the switch module related, and finally the description of the information, or is it a warning or the error. So whatever the type it is, the type related, the description you can see here. But when do we use it, the Catalina.out files, and when do we use it, the local host files, or the access files? Suppose user is saying about it, I'm trying to access that application, but some there's some exception which he is getting about it. Some like the page, suddenly the page cannot be displayed, it is showing that, or he is not able to access that application. So suppose he is not able to access that application, entire application is not able to access, that is a different story. Yeah, first of all, the request is coming to the server or not, we need to verify. That means access logs which we can verify that. But he is able to access that application, but whenever he is doing some transaction, the transaction is getting failed. What could be that, or what could be the reason of that? So you need to trace about it. Then the logs, the server logs or the transaction logs are going to help with that. So that is catliner.out. So that's the main core log file which contains the completed transaction of the servers. And user is not able to access it, or whether the request is received to the server or not, and from which are all the hosts that the request have been received. If we needed this kind of that information, then we can use it about access log files. So this is not only for this Tomcat server, any server you are working that the middleware server's point of view. So we'll be handling the main two log files, that is access log file, access information of the server, and second one is transaction log file. For the Tomcat point of view, so access log file, that is localhost underscore access underscore some date and time. So we have this, the timestamp, and the server log file point of view, catliner.out. Yeah, so there are the two important logs, access logs and the catliner.out files. So which we should know about it, these log files point of view. And the next point of view, like libraries, we don't have this any specification. So we don't have this any specification to talk it, but the configuration files will come back. When do we use it, these configurations? And the next is web apps. So like how do we use it at deployment applications? So there are some points we go for starting on that. So I have got this point so far, like Tomcat server, how do we install it, how do we start it, stop it, and how do we verify the process, and how do we use the log files to verify that the access informations are like a transaction information of the server. Yeah, so next point, what do we have this is like we are so whenever we are trying to understand this the folder system, okay, we can use it web apps folder, like where we can copy about our application directly to this web apps. Yeah, so we can take this var file or the jar file or like some er files if you have this, directly go to the Tomcat home directory, copy that the web apps folder, automatically which will be launched that application. But the point what I am expecting from this the Tomcat page is Tomcat this console. I would like to manage that all my applications. Managing that applications are nothing but, yeah, they're all the activities which are coming there in the managing that application, like either installing or updating or deleting, or I would like to see all the application, how many applications are hosted on the server, or what is the status of those the application statuses. So I would like to manage that all these activities through the GUI based. Suppose if you deploy that application, so how do we see this application is running or not? If I go to the web apps folder, so I can see that how many applications are hosted here. Okay, these are docs application or examples. There are the different applications, and one is the root application. Root application is, so what is root application is? Without giving any context name, so with that the username and IP address and port number, if you are able to access that application, is this is the root application which is running on this Tomcat server. So this is root application. And then so we have this, like suppose docs. So docs, if you see, that's documentation. If I'm accessing the documentation, is nothing but what is the application that you are accessing indirectly, /docs. This application you are accessing about it, like that examples application, manager applications, the host manager or root application. There are the different applications which are hosted. But how I can manage that all these applications? Suppose I can see this, okay, there are all the applications which are hosted, but these are all up and running or not, or these are all stopped or started, or I would like to update these applications. How I can do all these activities? So what is the one more application which are this is to manage all the applications which are hosted on the Tomcat is, that is the manager app. But to access this, so we need to configure some username and passwords. But what about the username and passwords? Let's try to access about it. So now we are trying to access about this manager app. So if I just click on this manager app, yes, so it is failing about it, access denied. But to get it that access denied, so we need to do some configurations. So what are those configurations that we need to perform it? Yes, so let's try to look at about it. So we are, you are not authorized to view this page. By default, manager is only accessible from a browser running on the same machine as Tomcat. That means what is the limitation that we have is, now we are trying to access this manager app application from the remote machine. That means from my Windows system, so I'm trying to access about that the manager application which is running on this host. But by default, what is the configuration that is defined is, so we cannot access this manager app application by using a remote system IP address. So that means we need to use it always the local host. With the local host by default, it is enabled. But if you use it some IP addresses, it is not going to work at that. So what is the one configuration we need to do this is, if you wish to modify this restriction, you will need to edit the manager's context of .xml file. So one configuration we need to do that. What is the configuration that we have is, so if we go to that web apps directory and manager application, this is a manager application related specific configuration. And in this manager app application, we have the meta-nf folder. In the meta-nf folder, we have the context.xml. So this is the context.xml. So if you open this context.xml file, and here if you just observe that this this is privileged only to access that allow either from 127.0.0.1, or we can use it the local host the names, the domain name systems, or we can use it about the 0000 with this representation. That means by default it is accepting only either localhost option or 127.0.0.1 options. So remote address value. So what we need to do this is, we can disable this if you'd like to access about the manager app application from the remote host. So let me disable this element. So write that the comment within that XML file. So just I have started this adding the content, adding the comment from here, that is starting tag, and this is the ending tag. So if you just define, and if you save this one, yeah, so now it is prompting for the username and password. Yes, before it was not giving that, because we are trying to use it about this remote system IP address, and which is restricting that. It is denying that to access it. So now we can define the username and password, but what is the username and password? We didn't define any username and password for this Tomcat server. So the first time, so let's cancel this one. And now you are going to have this one more type of exception, that is a 401 unauthorized. Before it was access denied on that host level, and now it is saying this is unauthorized. That means the user account we didn't define it, and we don't have any authorization to access it. It is throwing that exception. So we need to configure that one username and password to log into this manager app application. But where we can define the usernames and passwords. Yeah, so here you can just blindly follow this instruction, so nothing required. So you are not authorized to view this page, and if you haven't changed any configuration files, please examine the file. So which file? So which is saying this in the conf folder tomcat users.xml, and open that file and add these two lines in the configuration file. So let me copy these two entries. So just the first time I access about it and cancel it, which is going to give this tag. So let's copy these tags and let's add this in which file? Conf folder of the Tomcat home directory, tomcat users.xml. Before, what we were doing is manager app application in the meta-nf folder context.xml. We have commented that restriction of that IP address. Now what we are going to do this is, so we are adding about that one user account who can log into the manager app application to manage the applications. Suppose here, what is the directory is conf directory. What is the configuration file which we have this is tomcat users.xml. Yeah, by default in this configuration file everything is commented, so we don't see there's any roles by default. So what you can do this is simply you can go to this end of this line, not exactly end of the line, before this Tomcat uses end tag. So whatever you have copied in the browser, so these two lines, just copy and paste it here. Yeah, so the default role, what is the role that we have is, that is a manager GUI, there is a role, and username, so we can define this about our custom username and passwords. So username, I'm going to use the Tomcat, and the password, let me define as welcome. And the roles, yes, the manager GUI is the role. Yeah, so just copy those two elements and customize it about username, name and password, and save this. But there are the configuration files, we need to restart the Tomcat server. So let me go back to the bin folder, and let me shut down the process first, and let me start the server. But before, whenever we are doing this in the context.xml file of the manager app application, we didn't restart the service. That is just refresh the browser, automatically it is going to load that latest configuration. But this is the configuration file, the configuration conf folder. If you are doing any customization, then we need to have the restarting of the server. Now let me restart this. Yeah, now it is prompting. So I entered that the username and password which are defined in that Tomcat users.xml. That's a Tomcat and welcome. Yes, so now we are able to access it. So two configurations we have done. First one is go to the web apps folder, and then so the manager app application meta.nf folder, context.xml, open that and comment about the restriction of the IP addresses. By default it supports only localhost, but if you are using some remote IP addresses, then you need to disable that property. That is one thing. And the second option what we are trying to second configuration what we have done is, so to log into this manager app application with username and password, we have added the role and the username and passwords to the Tomcat users.xml. So this so just to copy that tag, and first time cancel this, then it is going to give the instructions to you. Yeah, so this is about the Tomcat application manager, which you can call that. And here you can see the list of all the applications. Yes, these are all the applications which are running within the Tomcat server. Like this is a path, that is a root application, root path. That means if I just give that, other than simple this URL, this is the root URL. So this application which will be accessed, but we are using now manager app application, and the path of that application and a version. So if it is a meta.nf files, if it is defined the version number also which will be displayed here, but non-specified. And this is a welcome to Tomcat application. And yes, what is the status that we have is, the status is true, that is running, but the sessions are 0. But what are the sessions? I'll come back. Sessions and commands. What are the commands that we have? This is, yes, we can start it, or we can stop these applications. Like there are all the activities we are trying to understand it. Yeah, we can start it, or we can stop that applications, or we can install it. So it means deployment or redeployment or undeployment. We can start it or we can stop it. We can update it or we can undeploy it. But what is the difference between the starting, stopping, or undeploy or the installing? Suppose let me try to access the docs. Suppose, yes, now I'm able to access the docs. Suppose if I stop this application, now it is started and which is up and running. Yes, good. So if I stop it, now what is the status that is showing is okay, stopped that application at context path, that is docs. Yes, docs application, now it has been stopped. So you can start this application or we can undeploy that application. So two activities we can perform, either starting or undeploying. But whenever it is stopped, we cannot access this application. Yes, application URL is not working. That's the 404. And if you verify that still that application, is it available in the web apps folder or not? still this docs application is available. That is not undeployed. That is just stopped. That means end user he cannot access it, but still that application is loaded by the server. Suppose if you would like to completely remove that reference from the server also, then we can go for undeploy. So if I click on this undeploy, anyway, docs application, it is just a sample one. We are not going to use it anyway. The complete application reference is not available in this list. So now we have the only examples are host manager application. Manager application, this is a manager application which we are using. We cannot stop it or we cannot undeploy this application. Suppose examples, if it is no more required, you can undeploy it. Yeah, now if you observe this here in the web apps folder, now the docs application completely it is removed from that web apps folder. Yeah, that is about. So the stop is end user, you are stopping that where he cannot access that application, and undeploy is completely application difference, you are doing that. So that means you're completely removing that. Yeah, so that's about some operations on these applications. Yeah, so there are the different applications and statuses you can see. But what about these sessions? Suppose manager app application which is showing one session, but remaining applications are showing this as 0 sessions. So which is indicating how many users currently logged into this application. Session is the login and the logout duration of that application. Suppose once the user is logged in with the username and password, what the application team will do this is, what of the user account which you have this, with that user account they are going to create internally about the session IDs. So which is going to have the client state at server level. That means what are the sequence of the transactions which I am performing this on the session. So which is going to use the session ID to manipulate it all the transactions. Like as simple as it is, one session ID is equal to one user account, which is indicating that. So here we have logged into the manager app application. One user account has been created internally. Like there are 100 users are logged in, are connected to this application. Then 100 sessions will be created. So it is indirectly which is indicating this is the load on the application as well. Like how many users currently logged into that. There is a number of sessions which are indicating. And one more, so but here this application wise we don't have that the start or stop or reload, because this is the application which will be use it to manage the applications. Yeah, they have disabled that all these options on this application point of view. And one more option what we have this is expert sessions. What of this expert session is, suppose in some of the banking applications, once if you log into that the banking application, but if you don't do that any activities, and after some time, so if you just refresh that the browser, which shows the session has been expired and where you need to re-log in once again that. That means banking applications, secured applications where they don't manage the sessions like, I mean, infinitely, like they don't go for this, the continuing that, even if you're not going to use the application also. That means if you're not going to access that application also, they're not going to continue with the session. That means they will wait for that 1 minute or 2 minutes. After the 2 minutes, if you are not using any application, immediately they are going to terminate the session which is created at server level. So which we can call this as session invalidations. So we have those three activities. Session active. So whenever you are interacting with that application, session will be continuing. Inactive. And once if you stop that accessing that application, any resource from that login use after login, then the session automatically going to become as inactive, and that inactive is going to continue about this time which is defined. That means expire session. That means the inactive of this 30 minutes of the session, then automatically the session will be invalidated. So session will be expired. Yeah, so we can define that for this application. So what is the maximum time, or like what is the time that we're expecting to have the session expirations? That is also we can define here. By default, it is setting this 30 minutes as the default one, but we can customize it. Yeah, there are the different activities, like you can start it, stop it, or reload, that is update existing version of that application. You can take it and you can redeploy the latest version of the application, that is the reloading, or undeploying, that is completely removing that application. But how do you perform the deployment activities? Yes, we have the var file to deploy it. So we have the two approaches to perform it. That is like using the console, we can do the deployment, or hard deployment also we can perform. But what about this hard deployment and what about these deployments? This will come back to that. Yeah, so this section, this manager app application, which is helping to view the list of all the applications and application related statuses and what is the load that we have from the end user's point of view, and you can manipulate it, or we can perform that actions on these applications as well as. Yeah, that's about there's today's concept which we have this. So where we are trying to understand until to this the log files and the deployments and one configuration file which we discussed. But still we have this one more important configuration file which we'll talk it tomorrow, and starting and stopping the servers and installation of the Tomcat servers, the log files understanding, and some status codes. Yes, the very important to understand, is it server issue or is it a client side issue. Yeah, the configuration files, the Tomcat users, that's where I had it, but server.xml file I'll talk at the tomorrow. And types of deployments, yes, we see this tomorrow, the types of deployments. So which one is the best one approach, we will talk it tomorrow. Some like around 15 to 20 minutes we have this on this Tomcat. So once that is discussed, next we go for that Nexus application taking and launching on the Tomcat server. And after launching the Nexus, we'll see that the snapshot URLs and release URLs, and we take those URLs and we'll integrate with Maven. So how do we integrate the Maven with Nexus repositories? So thus we try to understand tomorrow. Yeah, these are the points for today. So which you have this on the server's point of view, like installation, starting, stopping, and configurations, the log files. But configuration, we have still one more file, we'll come back. So how to customize the port numbers, that is one more point. So we'll come back. Yeah, so there are the points. So any queries or the questions for today? Yeah, any tool we are trying to use it in the CI/CD process, or whenever you are going to implement that, like automation, the scripts, like a configuration management tools. So always consider about these points. So suppose they have given that activity, like you need to write that automation script for that PostgreSQL. So the first you need to review the documentation of that, how I can install the PostgreSQL, or how I can start and stop the PostgreSQL, or how I can configuration. That means what are the main configuration files that's we have. And if you would like to verify there's any issues with this the server, so where the log files are located. So there are the at least activities which we need to do some R&D before going to try to implement the automation scripts for that tool. Which tool doesn't matter of it, the tool. So on the basis of the client we cannot so conclude that only this is the tool, this is the tool. But so that a tool, suppose if you don't know about the tool and before starting about it writing the Ansible scripts or some configuration management tools or some shell scripted tools, so then you need to understand about the tool, like how I can install it or how I can start it, stop it, or what are the main configuration of files to manage it of the tool, or the log files to track it about the issues from the servers. So these are all the at least points which we need to understand it before going to start to work on the automation point of view. But middleware source point of view, we have this additional activity, this is deployment, that is managing the applications as well as because in the CI/CD, so more features they keep on changing about it. The features you are going to try to deploy is nothing but that feature related artifact creation, artifact deployments, or the redeployments, and make sure that artifact is started, the change is available to the testing purpose or the end users. So there are all the points that we need to consider on the basis of the application server's point of view. Yeah, that's about some understanding on this the middleware server point of view. So today we'll wind up and tomorrow we'll continue. So starting talking about the Tomcat, the 15 to 20 minutes, then we discuss about the Nexus servers, how do we access it, and once those URLs are available, how do we integrate with Maven. Yeah, so that's points for today. So we'll wind up for today. So any queries or questions?